Well, hello, everyone. As you have seen, we have a playlist that is incomplete. The person who was reading the Beduin's Gazelle on YouTube did not record or have accessible the last few chapters. And so, what I'm going to do is read the remaining chapters online with you. I'm also going to share my screen so you can see the text as well. And with that, you'll see the text and where we are beginning. And I'm borrowing this from archive.org. And yeah, so we're going to get started. Etienne didn't dare look at Atia. He followed the woman who was leading them to the guest tent, allowing himself to be mesmerized by the thick braid of reddish black hair that swung down her back. She was robed in black from head to toe, so mysterious to him that he had to remind himself that, just like him, she had a complicated everyday life of her own. He had watched her face in the guest tent to avoid gawking at Halima, of whom he had heard so much. Her face had reflected anxiety, compassion, and maybe humor. The sheik had called her Sophia. Was that Arabic for Sophia? Did her name mean wisdom? With sincerity and faulty grammar, he murmured his thanks to her as she left them, adding, "Tell Halima of our joy in finding her alive." For the first time, he saw Sophia smile, revealing a gold tooth. Bowing her head, she glided out of the tent. Atia Berserk paid no attention to Sophia. He paced the small sleeping tent, punching its walls with his fist, making the dust fly. Ya Yima! Etienne Room, what do we do now? Halima is alive, Allah be praised, but oh, I want to howl like a coyote, shriek like a hyena, Mary Rasul. How could she? A Shamari? He seems a man of faith. If she had told him she was pledged to me, would he claim her? And if she has not told him, why not? Could she prefer him to me? The gray-eyed ghoul? Impossible. Etienne let Atia rave on. Nonsense was preferable to mute misery, and he needed time to think. Etienne wondered, in fact, Rasulu was a man of faith, for if he was, why hadn't he restored Halima to her father long since? If I could be sure that Halima was still Halima, Atia was saying, I would claim her as my cousin, my betrothed. Then a good sheik, even a Shumari, would send her home with gifts and blessings. But if Rasulu is a regular Shumari, he will kill me and you and keep Halima for himself, the fiend, telling no one. And if we were to escape tonight, if we were to escape tonight and tell Isafa, there would be war between the tribes. Rasula would take his vengeance by killing Ali. Much rests on his being a man of faith, said Etienne. Ah! Exclaimed Atia impatiently. Why do we discuss the faith of Rasulu? It is the faith of Halima that concerns me. For if she prefers that old sheik to me, then I don't care a fig if I live or die. And if more wars among the tribes, the better. Etienne jumped to his feet. Enough! Just listen for once, Atia. The anger in his voice surprised him and caught Atia's attention. Halima has not made this choice freely. I saw her face when she saw you. It was the face of one who looks on her beloved, whom she did not expect to see again. For all you know, said Atia, but he looked relieved. In the woman's stead, Halima bit her fingernails and stomped around the small space like a caged mountain lion. I'll go to Rasulu, Sophia. I'll Let him believe I will marry him. I should have said no 1,000 times. I didn't dare to hope that I would see Atiya again. Surely the sheik won't make me marry him now that Atiya is here. He may, Halima, said Sophia quietly. Here among the Beni Shumar, Rasulu is more powerful than Atiya. Rasulu is a man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. For days he has been collecting your bride price. Sophia. Sophia turned around her slowly. You love Rasulu? Sophia nodded grimly. Rasulu is a good man, strong and intelligent. It was almost a question. Strong and intelligent, yes, Sophia answered, but not always good. He can be cruel and greedy. He knows of the Beni Khalid. He knows them well. He misled me on purpose. And he will say that you misled him. Was it you who left him then? Sophia smiled sadly. If you call this leaving him, I suffered beside him uselessly. For years, I thought we were of one mind. Then I saw him slip into shoddy ways, caring more for himself than with his poorest people. And I argued with him. I drove him further away. Better, I decided to do what I myself could do well alone than add my strength for his purposes to which I could not agree. Halima looked at her friend, recognizing her power, her steadfastness. Life isn't over, she said. Do we dare hope? Sophia asked with the glimmer of her old spark. Grudgingly, Rasulu allowed Halima into his presence. He rose as she came in, but turned sideways to her and said nothing. I have come to beg a boon of you, knowing you will be a fair and generous man, said Halima. Rasulu nodded curtly. At least she would be allowed to speak. I was honored when you asked me to be your wife. Halima took a deep breath. She cleared her mind and her throat of anger. You are the sheik chosen by your people because of your merits, because of those qualities that have importance among our people: bravery in battle, wisdom in settling those matters of the people, adherence to the traditions of the Beni Shumar. The Shumari chose you because they knew you were a man of honor in whom they could put their trust. As my father Isafa was chosen by the Beni Khalid, you were chosen by the Beni Shumar. You and I are of two great tribes which follow the same wisdom. Halima paused, struggling to unwind her mind the complicated skeins of thought. Rasulu watched her, saying nothing. I was raised to be the wife of a sheik, to help lead a great tribe. As your wife, I hope to be the person I was raised to be, a person of whom my father would be proud. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. Rasulu nodded. And we could have brought each other joy. Rasulu turned away. Halima spoke again. But our laws go deeper. The tradition of both of our tribes speak differently now. Atiya and I were betrothed at birth. His claim on me is stronger than yours. For the sake of your honor among the tribes, I beg you to release him to me. Me to him, I'm sorry. I beg you to release me to him. Rasulu spoke at last, his voice heavy as if it dragged his words from far away. Tomorrow the wedding celebration will be held. Your cousin and the foreigner may come as guests. He turned, lifted the flap, and left the tent. Chapter 21. The Fool. Halima lay on her pallet, staring into the darkness. The weary hours of the night crept by. What had she said wrong? We could have brought each other joy. What a lie. She had said it to please, to soften her thoughts, not because she meant it. Forms of politeness, half-truths were making her blind. Her confusion brought memories of groping along in a sandstorm when she was very young, blinded and completely disoriented. Then she had had a hand to hang on to, Asafa's. There's not much you can be sure of in a sandstorm, he had said. If you glimpse the stars or the moon, that is way up. If the sand begins to cover you, reach your hand toward the sky. After the storm, when the dunes have changed shape, the shrubs the shrubs you use to guide you are covered. Look at the stars. Find the truth star, the one we count on not to change. Remembering Esapha's words calmed Halima. She lifted her tent flap and let the cool air blow on her sweaty face. She looked at the familiar constellations, and finally her eyes rested on the truth star. It looked small and cold. What is my truth? She asked herself aloud. What do I really know? She remembered a hot day with Atiya when they were both children. Atiya was jabbing at ants with his forefinger, killing them. She was furious with him, so mad she had a big lump in her throat. She remembered a fight they'd had while pasturing camels, both leaning against the same tree, their backs to each other in a huff until both turned at the same time and caught each other's eye. She remembered Atiya bleeding from the head, kicked by his own horse because he was trying to slide under its belly and up the other side while in full gallop. She remembered a tune he played on his flute, a melody that sounded much sadder than anything he had ever admitted feeling. One thing she knew was that she loved Atiya stupidly, like in the stories, and also in the full glare of day. She also knew how to find satisfaction in work done well, and in the counters that made the weave of life in a camp. She could make the best of marriage to Rasulu. She would put one foot before the other in the brightness of day. She would not dream, and she would not drop her water jar. But just as Sophia carried a sadness, so would she. There will be no full night and day joy in marriage to Rasulu. To be with him was to be on a shifting ground, on quicksand. Atiya, the gift of God. Did he believe he was perfect? No, he pretended gamely, beautifully, trying to live up to his name. And he was so near. She could slip out like a shadow and scramble like a gopher into the guest tent. Even the thought of it make her shake. If she were caught, she would be brought before the tribe. Her throat would be slit like a camel's, her dishonor washed away in blood. But what dishonor? There will be no dishonor if she went to tell Atiya the truth. The semblance of dishonor, that is what she would have to pay with her life. If Atiya would be sad, as she would be sad her whole life, at least let the true sadness, not anger, not doubt. Atiya should know that she had wanted only to go with him, to be his wife, and had always been planned. How could Atiya doubt her? Atiya was prideful, and they had been separated for a long time. Around and around her thoughts chased each other. At last she could bear them no longer. She brushed out her hair, replaited it. She touched her forehead to the ground in a wordless prayer. She slipped out of the tent and hurried across to the guest tent, her heart in her mouth. Etienne had agreed to keep watch all night. Rasula might send a killer, said Etienne. I hope he does, Etienne answered. If he comes himself, I'll kill him. The thought seemed to cheer him. Halfway through the long night, they both fell into a deep sleep. Halima found Etienne first in the dark and knew by the strange texture of his hair that he was not Etienne. Excuse me, she said in a stifled, nervous giggle. I need to find Atiya. Halima, came Atiya's voice from the dark. Goodbye. I'm taking a run, Etienne announced and rolled out under the wall of the tent. No, Halima said urgently, understanding his misunderstanding. Stay. But he was gone. Atiya sat bolt upright. He was invisible to Halima, but she knew where he was. Go, he said, go now. Halima shook her head hard. Her well-planned words had deserted her. They'll kill you. Go, cousin. Go, my love, please. There were tears in Atiya's voice. Halima heard them, and the hair rose on her arms. I have to speak first, said Halima. Don't dishonor them, said Atiya, and then don't dishonor us. Honor isn't in what they think I do, said Halima. Honor is what I do. Atiya caught his breath. Silence filled the tent, and the silence they heard, and in the silence they heard talking outside. Death is in what they think you do, said Atiya. Live, cousin. Be quiet, Atiya, said Halima. I will go, but I have to tell you something first. After tonight, I'll live in the daylight for the tribe. I'll be the wife to the old sheik if I must. But in the other true way, in songs and dreams and stories, I will be as we were meant to be, cousin. That is what I had to tell you. Halima reached for the edge of the tent, resigned to lifting it, rolling under it, creeping silently to her dreary future. She paused, and at the moment stretched in the darkness. She did not reach to touch Atiya. She simply savored his presence, wanting to stop time. When she lifted the tent side, a crack of light showed, and a foot stomped on her hand. The next moment, there was a woman's voice at the tent entrance and the smell of coffee. Etienne walked briskly through the night, trying to clear from his heart a confusion in which he recognized both envy and loneliness. The stars were fading, and a sudden brightness appeared behind the dunes to the east. Daybreak. Already? Etienne walked back toward the gathering of tents and stood watching the goats in the clothes. The air was cool enough so that their breath made little puffs of steam as they slept. It occurred to Etienne that he could take his horse and ride away before anyone awoke, and it would not change the happenings of the day by very much. He stood still, watching the pale dawn light blackened the rectangular tents against the brightening sand. The goats began to stir, and back close to the woman's tent. He heard the sharp crackle of burning thorn brush. He smelled the camel dung as it caught and began to smolder. He tried to pray that he and Atiya and Halima would live through the day ahead, but his Christian God, the God of his childhood, seemed hard to reach. The only thought that came to him was that the desert was a good place to die. He smiled to himself. He was too insignificant to die. Atiya had told him that he would live to be an old holy man, and his friends seemed to know about such things. Word of Atiya's arrival had spread through the tribe. A young man from far away, handsome as a prince, accompanied by a light-faced, blue-eyed Raoum. The black tents were lively with talk, and as soon as the first light streaked the sky, the old men, who slept little, came to sit together outside the guest tent in order to be the first to see the guests, to greet and question them. As Etienne turned back toward the tents, he saw men gathering and went to them. We should wake the other young man and bring him coffee, said one of the elders. He will need his sleep, for he traveled far yesterday. Let this man tell us about the room. It is true, boy, that the room warriors cover their bodies with shining metal when they go to battle, and that they sprout feathers from the tops of their heads, and they never wash. Etienne sat down among the old men and answered their question, acting out those things he didn't have the words to describe. He saw Sophia go into the guest tent with coffee. His heart quickened, and for the moment, words deserted him as he stared after her. The old man's eyes followed his. When Sophia came out, Etienne knew by her face that Halima was still inside. Our guest is awake now, for Sophia has brought him coffee, said one old man. Let us go and greet him. The man began slowly to rise to his feet. The moment seemed to last forever. Etienne's eyes focused on the extra tent pole leaning against one of the tents, and panic gave way to inspiration. Etienne jumped up to his feet before the elder could move toward the guest tent. Wait, let me show you how the room warriors prepare for battle, he shouted with enthusiasm. Here, some of you warriors line up on this side. Excuse me, uncle. Could you stand just here? That's right. And you three, stand over here. Now, you must take part in this too. Over here. So he had the men lined up and poised for action, four to each side. Now what? He thought in panic. Warriors, every time I pass, shake your fists in the air and shout, Vive le roi! Vive le roi! There, louder. Vive le roi! You got it. The accompaniment to their shouting, Etienne acted out the rowdiest of jousting meets, galloping between the two rows of old men, brandishing the spear tent pole. The old men shouted at each other, passing, half in fear, half in merriment. A fool, Etienne thought, I'm a fool for life, but he had their attention. As he turned back toward the guest tent, he carefully aimed his lance at the center supporting pole. He ran at a gallop, singing the French battle song at the top of his lungs. By now, the old men were shouting with laughter, and the women had come out of their tents to watch, and the children were awake and joining in as well, clapping and stomping their feet, chanting "Vive la Roi!" They cheered, and the clown who had appeared among them. Crack! Etienne's lance hit the center pole of the guest tent. The rope popped and flew into the air. The tent collapsed in a sky-high cloud of dust, amid shouts with some help from Sophia, who seemed to be trying to hold it up on one side. The noise and the hubbub were tremendous, and before calm was restored, Halima was seen coming out of the woman's tent, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What in the world is going on? She asked the children. Is the room a jinn? Have we buried our other guest? Good job, Etienne. Sheikh Rasulu's feast. The dust had barely settled when men grabbed poles and ropes and raised the guest tent again, drove its pegs deep into the sand, and sent the old man inside to inquire solicitously about the young guest. The smell of roasting coffee beans wafted around the tents. Women poured still warm beans rattling into the carved mortars. Boys wielding pestles almost as tall as themselves threw them down, pounding and berating pounding the beans to powder, the rhythms of their work reverberating among the hills, invited the Shumari to the guest tent to help their sheik give hospitality before the wedding ceremony. Children were sent reluctantly off to tend the herds in the place of their elders. Men washed and prayed with special care, oiled their beards, and donned their cleanest robes. Women painted the soles of their feet red with henna. They opened their coffers and lifted out heavy gold necklaces, which they sent gently around each other's necks. In the kitchen tent, girls heaped platters with bread and dates and dried figs and carried them, two on each side, to the guest tent. Halima and Sophia helped, with no time to talk and little to say. Sometimes, as they passed each other, their eyes met and their hands clasped briefly. Only the men could sit inside the tent, but the side was opened and stretched out to new poles to form a breezeway where women and children could gather. Carpets were hastily brought from other tents and rolled out in this extension. Never had Rasulu received so many, and his people were proud for him. They shouted approval as more poles were brought. Raoum, come, help us enlarge this tent. No, Etienne Room, please stay far from us while we work. The story of Etienne's accident was told and enacted again and again as more people gathered. The smell of coffee and cardamom, the rich red colors of the carpets exposed to the sun, the red heels of the women, and the flashes of gold from their jewels were in laughter and approving excitement of the crowd made Halima's sorrow so out of place that she felt guilty for it. This gathering was for the good of the tribe, and she tried to forget that the occasion for it was her marriage to Sheikh Rasulu. Coffee dregs piled up outside Rasulu's tent. The men breakfasted, reaching 10 at a time for bread from the copper platters as women threw more dough on the metal bread griddles. Halima wished that the breakfast would go on forever, but when the sun stood above, she found that all the cups and platters had been gathered up, and the water carriers had made their rounds. The men had washed and were ready for speeches. Her heart sank in dread as Rasulu rose to his feet. She did not even dare to look at Atiya. Shumari, Rasulu began, people of the desert, I have brought you here to tell you a story. The Rasulu's people sighed contentedly. Rasulu's voice Rasulu's voice ground slowly, spinning out the tale most knew already. My story begins with a young girl lost during a storm in the great sand sea, alone and near death. For a day and a night and a night and a day she wandered. Allah, all praise to be to him, brought her within the reaches of our camp. A huntsman rode forth with his falcon. The prey he found was a treasure far greater than the prey he had sought. He found the young girl and brought her to us into these very tents where you sit. Slowly, slowly, she recovered from her ordeal, and as she as she healed, this young woman revealed herself to us in beauty, in skill, and in strength of character. Raisulu paused and took a deep breath. He looked at Halima for a long moment silently, then turned and spoke to his people. This young woman, whom we call Halima, I have asked to become my wife. A murmur of approval rose from the assembled tribe as all faces turned to acknowledge Halima. A wedding feast is planned for tonight, Raisulu continued. There will be singing and dancing and feasting and giving of the bride price. The people cheered with enthusiasm, then quieted, seeing that their sheik had more to say. Into our midst, on this propitious day, have ridden two guests. Listen well, Shumari, for it is up to you to decide how these guests will be treated. One guest comes from across the sea. He is called a Tan Room. His people have fought for the Christian God. Like us, he is a man of the book. Unlike us, he is not a builder, but a destroyer of tents. At this, the crowd roared with laughter. Rasulu waited until they were quiet. Our other guest comes from a people who have been our rivals in the desert, people whom you have fought, worthy and fearsome adversaries. Thanks to the bravery of our warriors, we have some of their best horses and camels. I speak of the Beni Khalid. Another roar from the crowd, a mixture of amazement, of indignation, and of excitement. But there is more to the story, O Shamari. Not a sound could be heard, even outside the tent where the women and children sat wrapped in attention. The son of the Beni Khalid is the first cousin of the woman whom we found lost in the desert, the woman Halima who was to become my bride. A buzz of excitement from the crowd quickly hushed. Halima stood like stone. She glimpsed Atiya on the other side of Raisulu, suddenly incandescent with hope. Tell me, O Shumnari, for it will be your decision, how should we receive our guests? Invite them to the wedding. Give them each a camel, 2 camels for the destroyer of tents. Sheikh Raisulu held his palms out to quiet these suggestions. He cleared his throat and moved into a shaft of sunlight. All eyes were on him. The pulse beat beside his eye. The pulse beat up beside his eye. I will do more than that, O Shamari, he said at last. Much more. Rasulu gazed out above the heads of his people, through the tent and the open breezeway, out to the hills of sand and the blue sky. His expression was sad, a little surprised, as if he himself was not sure what he would say next. I will give up my bride, he said, who have saved from death, in the name of Allah and of the Asabaya, the code of the desert, which makes all of us one tribe. I relinquish the beautiful Halima to her first cousin, Atiya. The crowd roared with its approval. Men leaped to their feet, fists in the air. Tears streamed down the cheeks of matrons. Halima clutched the tent pole to keep from falling. Atiya fell to his knees and kissed Rasula's hand. Rasula raised Atiya to his feet, then turned again to his people, for there was more to be said. Tonight, he shouted over the tumult, and they quieted. Tonight, the Beni Shamar will hold a wedding feast surpassing any you have seen in honor of the wedding of Halima and her betrothed, her cousin Atiya. Allah loves the man who is noble, shouted someone in the crowd, and they began a chorus of Rasulu, Rasulu. And what should we do for the other guests? Someone asked. A hush fell. Speak your wish, guests from across the sea. But Etienne, whose head was still spinning from the turn of events, could think of nothing more in the world that he wished for, and no words to express his amazement. As he stood with his mouth open, some jokesters shouted, Vive le roi! The crowd took it up, shouting over and over. Amid the high hilarity that seized them all, Etienne noticed most a flash of Sophia's gold tooth. The prayer was read and the songs were sung. As the day waned and women prepared the roast and fat-drenched bread, the men raced their finest camels and horses. Rasulu raced among them, his horse kicking up plumes of white sand as he wheeled, raced again, and won, cheered on by his people. The night rang with music and merriment, and the young men danced, each resting an arm on his neighbor's shoulder, all eyes on the stamp of their feet, as faster and faster they followed the beat of the drum. Atiya and Halima withdrew to their bridal tent, which Sophia had lovingly prepared. Etienne joined the bachelor's dance, keeping time to the goatskin drum and the kicking of his heels. In the morning, a messenger was sent to the Beni Khalid to the Wadi Hamat, where Atiya knew Asefa would likely be camped with his people. Halima, Atiya, and Etienne were escorted into the desert with fine gifts from the Raisulu and Sophia, a herd of camels, necklace in blue, and ample provisions. For 5 days they rode across the desert with banners flying. When the outlying herdsmen of the Wadi Hamamat brought word of their approach, the women of the Beni Khalid let down their long black hair and sang out loud trills of welcome, and the men rode forth to meet them. Nazarene, riding on the neck of her father's camel, flew like a hawk to greet her sister. From that day to this, the legend grew how Isefa sent gifts to Raisulu of the Shumari and begged his visit, and how the two tribes lived in peace and friendship when the story is told at night in the tents of hair, the storyteller will often add. They had peace and plenty year after year. May God send such fortune to you who sit here. In later years, Atiya made his peace with Saladin And as Sheikh of the Beni Khalid sent one of Halima's younger brothers to ride the right hand of the Caliph Abu Yaqub in his triumphal march between Fez and Tlemcen. This brother, a tough and wily warrior, fought in battles as far away as Spain for the Marinid Empire to extend Islam among the heathen. But Atiyan and Halima never left the desert because it pleased them to stay there among their sons and daughters. The end. And that's it.